You mentioned to jump around a little bit the First Amendment. First of all, what is the First Amendment, and what is the connection to you between the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, and cancel culture?
Sure. So I'm a First Amendment lawyer, as I mentioned, and that's what that's my passion. That's what I studied, and I think American First Amendment law is incredibly interesting. In one sentence, the First Amendment is trying to get rid of basically all the reasons why humankind had been killing each other for its entire existence. That we weren't going to fight anymore over opinion. We weren't going to fight anymore over religion. That you have the right to approach your government for redress of grievances. That you have the freedom to associate. That all of these things in one sentence, we're like, nope. The government will no longer interfere with you with your right to have these fundamental human rights. And so one thing that makes FIRE a little different from other organizations is, however, we're not just a First Amendment organization. We are a free speech organization. And so, but at the same time, a lot of what I think free speech is can be well explained with reference to a lot of First Amendment law, partially because in American history, some of our smartest people have been thinking about what the parameters of freedom of speech are in relationship to the First Amendment. And a lot of those principles, they transfer very well just as pragmatic ideas. So like the biggest sin in terms of censorship is called viewpoint discrimination, that essentially you allow freedom of speech except for that opinion. Now, it's found to be kind of more defensible, and I think this makes sense. That if you set up a forum and like we're only going to talk about economics to exclude people who want to talk about a different topic, but it's considered rightfully a bigger deal if you set up a forum for economics, but we're not going to let people talk about that kind of economics or have that opinion on economics, most particularly. So a lot of the principles from First Amendment law actually make a lot of philosophical sense as good principles for when, like, what is protected and unprotected speech, what should get you in trouble, how you actually analyze it, which is why we actually try in our definition of cancel culture to work in some of the First Amendment norms just in the definition, so we don't have to bog down on them as well.
You're saying so many interesting things, but if you can linger on the viewpoint discrimination, is there any gray area of discussion there? Like what is and isn't economics, for the example you gave?
Yeah.
Is there I mean, is it a science or is it an art to draw lines of what is and isn't allowed?
Yeah, if you're saying that something is or is not economics, well, you can say everything's economics, and therefore I want to talk about poetry. There'd be some line drawing exercise in there. But let's say at once you decide to open up it to poetry even. It's a big difference between saying, okay, now we're open to poetry, but you can't say, Dante was bad. Like that's a forbidden opinion now officially in this otherwise open forum. That would immediately at an intuitive level strike people as a bigger problem than just saying that poetry isn't economics.
Yeah, I mean, that intuitive level that you speak to, I hope that all of us have that kind of basic intuition when the line is crossed. It's the same thing for like pornography, right?
Yes.
When you see it, I think there's the same level of intuition that should be applied across the board here.
Hmm.
And it's when that intuition becomes deformed by whatever forces of society, that's when it starts to feel like censorship.
Yeah, I mean, people find it a different thing. If someone loses their job simply for their political opinion, even if that employer has every right in the world to fire you, I think Americans should still be like, well, it's true. They have every right in the world. And I'm not making a legal case that maybe you shouldn't fire someone for their political opinion, but think that through. Like, what society do we want to, what kind of society do we want to live in? And it's been funny watching, and I point this out. Yes, I will defend businesses' First Amendment rights of association to be able to have the legal right to decide, who works for them. But from a moral or philosophical matter, if you think through the implications of if every business in America becomes an expressive association in addition to being a profit maximizing organization, that would be a disaster for democracy because you would end up in a situation where people would actually be saying to themselves, I don't think I can actually say what I really think and still believe I can keep my job. And that's where I was worried. I felt like we were headed because a lot of the initial response to people getting canceled was very simply, but they have the right to get rid of this person. And that's the end and beginning and end of the discussion. And I thought that was a dodge. I thought that wasn't actually a very serious way that if you care about both the First Amendment and freedom of speech, of thinking it through.
So to you, just to clarify, the First Amendment is kind of a legal embodiment of the ideal of freedom of speech, and then freedom of
As
speech,
applied to government.
and it's very specific applied to government. And freedom of speech is the application of the principle to like everything, including like kind of the high level philosophical ideal of of the value of people being able to speak their mind.
Yeah. It's an older, bolder, more expansive idea. And you can have a situation, and I talk about countries that have good free speech law, but not necessarily great free speech culture. And I talk about how when we sometimes make this distinction between free speech law and free speech culture, we're thinking in a very cloudy kind of way. And what I mean by that is that law is generally, particularly in a common law country, it's the reflection of norms. Those judges are people too, and in a lot of cases, common law is supposed to actually take our intuitive ideas of fairness and place them, into the law. So if you actually have a culture that doesn't appreciate free speech from a philosophical standpoint, it's not going to be able to protect free speech for the long haul, even in the law, because eventually that's one of the reasons why I worry so much about some of these terrible cases coming out of law schools, because I fear that even though, sure, American First Amendment law is very strongly protective of First Amendment for now, it's not going to stay that way if you have generations of law students graduating who actually think there's no higher goal than shouting down you're an opponent.
Yeah, so that's why so much of your focus, or a large fraction of your focus, is on the higher education or education period, is because education is the foundation of culture.
Yeah, you have this history, 64, you have the free speech movement on Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
And in 65, you have Repressive Tolerance by Herbert Marcuse, which was a declaration of, by the way, we on the left, we should have free speech, but we should have free speech for us. I mean, I went back and reread Repressive Tolerance, and how clear it is. I had forgotten that it really is kind of like, and these so-called conservatives and right-wingers, we need to repress them because they're regressive thinkers. It really doesn't come out to anything more sophisticated than the very old idea that our people are good. They get free speech. They should keep it. Other side, bad. We should not have, and we have to retrain society. And of course, like it ends up being another. He was also a fan of Mao, so it's not surprising that of course, the system would have to rely on some kind of totalitarian system. But that was a laughable position, say 30, 40 years ago. The idea that essentially, free speech for me, not for thee, as the great, free speech champion Nat Hentoff used to say, was something that you were supposed to be embarrassed by. But I saw this when I was in law school in 97. I saw this when I was interning at the ACLU in 99, that there was a slow motion train wreck coming, that essentially there was these bad ideas from campus that had been taking on more and more steam of basically no free speech for my opponent, were actually becoming more and more accepted and partially because academia was becoming less and less viewpoint diverse. I think that as my co-author Jonathan Haidt points out, that when you have low viewpoint diversity, people start thinking in a very kind of tribal way. And if you don't have the respected dissenters, you don't have the people that you can point to that I'm like, hey, this is a smart person. This is a smart, reasonable, decent person that I disagree with. So I guess not everyone thinks alike on this issue. Mm-hmm. You start getting much more kind of like only bad people, only heretics, only blasphemers, only right-wingers, can actually think in this way.